This is the iPad mini 4, and this is the iPad mini 5. Yes, we finally have a brand new iPad mini almost 4 years after the previous model got released. It seems like the iPad mini lineup is not dead after all. So I wanted to do an extremely in-depth comparison between the two, the iPad mini 4 and the iPad mini 5, covering everything from the design, the display, the performance, cameras, special features, battery price, and so much more. Video editing, gaming, everything is covered in this video. So grab some snacks, and here's everything you need to know, the ultimate comparison between the iPad mini 4 and the iPad mini 5, 4 years later. Okay, so the biggest new feature of the Mini 5, which I'll get back to towards the end of the video, is finally support for the Apple Pencil. And while this is amazing to have, unfortunately one of my main issues is that whenever you're using the Apple Pencil, it just slides around too easily, and it feels as if you're writing on a piece of glass window. It doesn't feel natural. So you're lacking that extra resistance that you would get with something like, a real piece of paper. But luckily, this can be fixed with Paperlike, our sponsor for this video. Paperlike turns your iPad's display into something that actually feels like real paper instead of that slippery feel that you had before. So you can be far more accurate with your drawings and your notes. And as a bonus, it also sounds like real paper whenever you're writing or drawing on it. Use the link in the description or the code ZONE10 for a 10% discount when buying Paperlike, and thanks again to Paperlike for being a sponsor of this video. Okay, so the original iPad mini was launched in 2012, the iPad mini 2 in 2013, the iPad mini 3 in 2014, and the iPad mini 4 in 2015. The first, the second, and the third gen iPad minis, they had the exact same dimensions, while the mini 4 was indeed thinner, coming in at just 6.1mm thin versus 7.4 that the mini 3 had. It also had a laminated display with an anti-reflective coating, so the changes from the Mini 3 to the Mini 4 were very similar to the changes from the iPad Air 1 to the iPad Air 2. So the Mini 4 was a great device, even though design-wise it was very similar to even the Mini 1 from 3 years before, just with a more refined look. However, the Mini 5 from 2019, almost 4 years after the Mini 4 came out, has the exact same design as the Mini 4, which is really disappointing. It has the exact same height, the exact same width, the same thickness, and yes, the exact same massive bezels on the top and the bottom. And considering that this design came out in 2012, yes, the Mini 5 has a 7-year-old design, so just like the iMacs, this thing looks outdated AF. By AF, I obviously mean autofocus. Now, there are 3 small design changes, that I want to mention. So the first one is the microphone port, which has been moved from the right-hand side next to the camera to the middle. The second design change, which I really like, by the way, is the fact that the space gray on the Mini 5 is much darker than the space gray on the Mini 4. It's pretty much as dark as the one on the 2018 iPad Pro, and yes, it's even darker than a MacBook Pro space gray, so it kind of reminds me of the first gen iPad Mini, even though that was even darker than this. So yes, design-wise, I know it sucks. The fact that we have exactly the same design as 4 years ago, that sucks. However, with the same design, you can also use your old accessories. So if you have any old accessories from the Mini 4, any old cases, they would still work perfectly. However, keep in mind that because of that microphone port, which was repositioned, audio recordings from video on the back would be quite bad, unless you literally punch a nail hole in the case itself, or you get a case that was specifically designed with the iPad Mini 5 in mind. And then the third design change is that the frame itself isn't shiny anymore, but matte instead, which means that it blends in with the back of the iPad much nicer than on the Mini 4, so I really do like this change, to be honest. But I mean, other than that, they are identical. Even the home button is the same clickable home button that we haven't had in iPhones since the iPhone 6s, which was released, guess when? In 2015, literally the same year the iPad Mini 4 came out. So yeah, there's no denying that the design of the iPad Mini 5 is very outdated. But what about the actual display? Well, the good news is that here's where we get to see the first improvements. While the display size has remained the exact same at 7.9 inches, and the resolution has also remained the same at 2048 by 1536, which translates to a PPI of 326. So yes, the iPad mini is actually the sharpest iPad there is in terms of the pixel density alone, but the iPad mini 5 does have a DCI-P3 display versus sRGB on the Mini 4. So just like the iPad Pro, this means that the display can show more colors, everything is more vibrant, and more pleasing to the eye, and this is actually very, very noticeable between the two. Then the second display upgrade is in terms of the brightness, which again is quite noticeable. So the Mini 5 can go up to 500 nits versus Apple claims 450 nits on the iPad Mini 4, but honestly, there's no way it's nowhere near that, guys. I mean, there is a very noticeable difference between the two. The Mini 4 looks to be about 300 to 350 nits, I would say, while the Mini 5 is definitely around 500 or so. So a pretty big difference when it comes to the brightness between the two. And then finally, the third display upgrade is that we finally get the True Tone on the iPad Mini 5. So the display itself can automatically adjust the color temperature based on the lighting conditions in your environment. So it tries to match the ambient color, which makes it very, very easy on the eyes when you're reading. Just make sure that you disable this when you're editing any photos or videos. Okay, so the display itself was a pretty big upgrade, not a massive upgrade, but a big upgrade. So what about the performance now? Well, if you take a look at the iPad Mini 4, it comes with the Apple A8 processor, or the same processor that's inside an iPhone 6 from 2014. So yeah, this thing comes with a 5-year-old processor. It's based on a 20nm process. It's a dual-core chip. It actually has 2 cores at 1.5 gigahertz, and it also comes with 2 gigabytes of RAM. Okay, so what about the iPad Mini 5? Well, this one comes with the Apple A12 chip, which is actually the same processor as in the iPhone XS from 2018, so less than a year old. This is based on a 7nm processor, so quite a big difference between the two, and it's a hexa-core processor, so it has 6 cores, 2 cores at 2.5 gigahertz and 4 cores at 1.6 gigahertz, and then also 3 gigabytes of RAM on the Mini 5 versus the Mini 4. And I've run some benchmarks, and here are the results. So when it comes to the CPU benchmarks, we have Geekbench 4, and here the iPad Mini 4 scores 1,733 for the single core score and 3,017 points for the multi-core. And then take a look at this. So the iPad Mini 5, this is insane. The iPad Mini 5 scores 4,825 points for the single core and 11,427 for the multi-core. So 2.8 times faster for the single performance and 3.8 times faster for the multi-core performance. Now, when it comes to the GPU performance, I've ran Geekbench 4 Compute, which tests out the metal performance of the GPUs. And when it comes to the iPad Mini 4, this one scored 4,939 points, and the iPad Mini 5 scored 21,221, so 4.3 times faster in terms of the GPU performance. But wait, I'm not done yet. So here's a storage speed test. The iPad Mini 4 scores 140 megabytes per second write speeds and about 350 to 400 for the read speeds. The Mini 5 scores between 100 and 150 megabytes per second for the write speed, so pretty much identical to the Mini 4. However, when it comes to the read speeds, we have 1.5 gigabytes per second, which is insane. So a pretty big difference between the two when it comes to the benchmarks. But what about, some actual tests that some of you might actually do? So when it comes to video editing, for example, the iPad Mini 4 can only handle 1080p footage in iMovie. I couldn't make it recognize anything more than 1080p. 4K wouldn't work. The Mini 5 handles 4K easily and buttery smooth. Anything that's higher than 1080p doesn't work, unfortunately, on the Mini 4. At least not in iMovie. So here I have a 10-minute 1080p project, which, both of these iPads can handle. And the iPad Mini 4 exported this in 3 minutes and 17 seconds, which is really, really impressive. The iPad Mini 5, though, exported this, and guess how long? Can you guess? Leave a comment down below. Well, it's actually 3 minutes and 6 seconds. Only 11 seconds faster than the iPad Mini 4. So what's happening here? Well, I'm guessing it's one of those things where even if you test, 1080p video editing or 720p on your machines, and you have a lot of, in the office we have a lot of Macs, testing 1080p's across those machines is pretty much identical in terms of export times. So the harder, if you want to test out performance when it comes to newer devices, you need to give them something a bit more difficult to handle, like 4K footage. And again, the iPad Mini 4 cannot handle 4K footage. The Mini 5 exported a 4K project in 12 minutes and 3 seconds, which is very impressive. Again, I cannot test this though on the Mini 4. So what about some gaming? So here we have Fortnite running on the iPad Mini 4. It runs pretty well. It runs in 30 frames per second though, although this is on the lowest possible settings. So yeah, it's not looking great. It's fluid, but it's not looking great. On the iPad Mini 5, it runs in 60 frames per second on high settings, or 30 frames per second on epic settings. So everything is extremely fluid, especially in 60, and the graphics look amazing. So there's a massive difference when it comes to the resolution as well. It's basically incomparable. So yeah, insane improvement if you care about gaming and you're coming from the iPad mini 4. Now, when it comes to using these daily, yes, there is a very big difference in terms of fluidity between the two. My mini 4 constantly stutters and lags. You know, this doesn't really happen on camera usually, so it's a bit hard to show that. But yes, it does lag, it does stutter. The performance isn't that great. However, the mini 5 is buttery smooth. They just don't even compare. So everything happens in an instant on the mini 5 versus the mini 4, which does take noticeably longer to launch and load apps. And that extra 1 GB of RAM on the mini 5 means that it can actually support 3 live apps running at the exact same time versus 2 apps on the mini 4. So on the mini 4, if you open up the third app as a slide over, it would actually put the other 2 to sleep. Whereas on the mini 5, all 3 of them are usable at the same time. Moving on to the camera section, here we get another big improvement. So the front camera on the mini 4 was a 1.2 megapixel, yes, 1.2, not 12, 1.2 megapixel f2.2 aperture camera, and now we have a 7 megapixel f2.2 aperture camera on the iPad mini 5. So combine that with the image processing that's inside the Apple A12 chip, and the front camera on the mini 5 is a huge upgrade. Highlights are not being blown out anymore, the colors are much more vibrant, so everything is so much better on the mini 5. And the mini 5 can also do 1080p video with a front-facing camera versus 720p on the iPad mini 4. So here's an example. Okay, so this is a front-facing camera test between the iPad mini 4 and the iPad mini 5. So first of all, take a look at obviously the image, the background behind me, how blown out it is on the mini 4 versus, you know, the mini 5. And then listen to my voice. Which one has a better microphone? The mini 4, this is the audio coming from the mini 4, and this is the audio coming from the mini 5. Now, when it comes to the back-facing camera, it seems to be the same one, at least when it comes to the specs. So we have 8 megapixel resolution on both, an f2.4 aperture, and both of them can record 1080p video at 30 frames per second. But the images themselves, they do look quite a bit better on the mini 5, so low light is better, there is less noise, and I think that Apple has either slightly upgraded the sensor on the iPad mini 5, or the Apple A12 image processing is the one responsible for this level of improvement on the mini 5. Now, when it comes to the special features, aside from everything that I've already covered before, the speakers have also been improved on the mini 5. So even though they're still the same dual speakers located on the bottom as on the mini 4, they are louder and they do sound better as well. And aside from this, we have the biggest new feature on the mini 5, and that is support for the Apple Pencil. This was something that was restricted to the iPad Pros, and the same applies to the Apple Smart Keyboard, but it seems like Apple's now bringing Pro features that were exclusive to the iPad Pros to the regular iPads as well. So the iPad Air 2019 got support for both the Pencil and the Smart Keyboard. The iPad mini 5 didn't get support for the Smart Keyboard at all, most likely due to its size. You know, it's crazy small, but it did get support for the Apple Pencil. And I do have to say, it's amazing having, you know, full Apple Pencil support on the mini, even though it's just the first generation Apple Pencil and not a second gen one. By the way, check out Paperlike in the description if you want to make your iPad's display feel like actual paper when you're writing or drawing on it. But there's still that notebook style feeling whenever I use the mini to write something down. So, you know, it's a really nice feeling, to be honest, and it's really nice to have the Apple Pencil. And while you can use this to draw professional artwork, I wouldn't really suggest doing that at all. That's because the display is just too small. There's no ProMotion support at all, like on the iPad Pros, and the Apple Pencil itself is just massive. I mean, it's bigger than the iPad's display entirely. So, you know, using it on such a small display is quite uncomfortable, but it is a nice thing to have. Now, when it comes to the battery life, they both have the exact same battery size of 5,124 mAh, and they both claim to last for about 10 hours of continuous use. Now, my Mini 4, since I've had this thing for almost 4 years now, it can't even last a single day. But when I got it brand new, I could easily use it for a few days, which has been pretty much the same with my Mini 5. So battery life, from my experience, they're pretty much identical when the Mini 4 was, you know, also brand new. And finally, when it comes to the price, the Mini 5 starts at $400 or £400 for the 64GB model. The Mini 4, on the other hand, started at $400 back in the day for the 16GB model, or £320 in the UK. So there you go. This was back in the day when Apple was not doing this really annoying 1-to-1 conversion ratio, which by the way isn't even legit. They're just inflating the price everywhere else outside the US. Okay, so in the end, the iPad mini 5 is indeed a pretty big upgrade from the mini 4. And you know, that's how it should be. I mean, it's been almost 4 years since the mini 4 came out, and Apple used to release a brand new iPad mini every single year. And while the performance improvements are big, the display improvements are modest, and the camera improvements are so-and-so, the design has remained identical since 2012. But you know, if you need a small and portable tablet, there is literally nothing on the market that can even come close to the iPad mini 5 2019. It's just that, you know, Apple should have done something more than just a spec bump to the same 70-year-old design. Let me know in the comments, what do you guys think about the iPad mini 5 down below. Give this a like if you've enjoyed it. Let me know. Follow on Instagram at ZenofTech for more tech content, and at ZenofConcepts for more tech concepts. I'm Daniel, and I'll see you guys in the next video. ZenofTech, signing out. Cheers.